Members of the Diplomatic Corps, COP30 President, His Excellency Ambassador André Corrêa do Lago, delegates, special invitees, members of the media, good morning all. Thank you for joining us for day 2 of this historic chapter, and indeed a landmark moment in the global fight to protect biodiversity. Yesterday brought together critical insights and discussions from some of the most profound thought leaders in this field. And today we will continue that journey with more distinguished voices who will guide us through what promises to be a transformative experience, one we will all be proud to have been part of. On this note, I would like to invite a distinguished voice of this very soil, Ms. Pradeepa Bolanat, Senior Director of Climate and REDD+ at the Ministry of Natural Resources, to share key highlights from day 1 and to set the tone for what will unfold on day 2. Ms. Bolanat.
Thank you very much, Kiana. Good morning, everyone. Excellencies, President Duque, our ambassador to the Global Biodiversity Alliance and our guide. His Excellency, the President of COP30, we are very pleased that you're able to join us today. Members of the Diplomatic Corps, all the special invitees, heads of agencies, colleagues all. Welcome to the second day of the Global Biodiversity Alliance inaugural summit. It is my pleasure this morning, on behalf of His Excellency President Ali, to welcome you to today's proceedings and to express President's appreciation for your continued support and attendance and commitment and involvement as we discuss key aspects of biodiversity conservation, biodiversity financing, and biodiversity monitoring. President Ali is especially pleased at in terms of your involvement, but also in terms of your interest in taking forward the work of the Alliance to the next stage, not only in the run-up to our immediate one-year period, but as we move towards 2030. And a lot of those discussions started yesterday as we charted the path to 2030 and our immediate next step, which is to COP30. As a starter to today's discussion, we thought it would be helpful to recap some of the main messages and main themes covered in yesterday's proceedings. We were fortunate in the opening session yesterday to hear from high-level delegates on areas reflecting on the nature of the crisis. We were also able to hear aspects with regards to conservation goals, what has been taking place not only at the national level, but at the community level. And in the opening session yesterday, we were fortunate to have presentations delivered by Her Excellency, Mia Amor Motley. We were also able to have presentations from Honorable Dr. Ralph Gonzalez, as well as reflections from Her Excellency Maria Pinto, Vice President of the Republic of Ecuador, as well as reflections from President Duque, President Ali delivering the feature address, and several high-level speakers over the course of the morning half-day of yesterday. The message that was delivered in that high-level session encapsulated the unique strengths of diverse nations and institutions that have been at work for many decades in delivering the commitments made on biodiversity conservation, and in setting out the ambition, the political ambition, for what lies ahead of us. In the afternoon of yesterday, we were able to hear from key institutions, research organizations, as well as the NGO community, looking at aspects with regards to highlighting what the success stories have been, what the lessons learned have been, and what lies ahead in terms of community action, and how this could be framed within the 30 by 2030 agenda. Yesterday afternoon, we were able to have some concurrent sessions in the Lula Room, and that format will continue today. As we closed yesterday's session, we were also able to look at the framing of what will be key components of a roadmap, an action plan that will take us to 2030 as we outline those key areas across the pillars in keeping with the objectives of the Global Biodiversity Alliance. And among some of the areas we discussed are those that are vital through President Duque's presentation for biodiversity financing, what we need to take into consideration as we think about the levers that need to be addressed to have the level of biodiversity financing that is required. We also looked at presentations, and we've started to think about what needs to be done to bring together the science to back the policy. And we've heard presentations from the FAO, from the WWF, from Conservation International, as well as from CI and from Yale University on what some of these actions could be in terms of science influencing and informing policy. And perhaps most importantly, we listened in the concurrent session on those areas that need to be key parts of the community-driven agenda as we look at the people focus of biodiversity conservation. And we heard from those concurrent sessions, those parallel sessions that took place in the Lula Room on community-level action and how this is driving change. In summary, I think we have been successful in laying out the landscape of work that has been undertaken at every level over the course of the last perhaps decade and a half. And that work is going to be crucial to informing the next steps in terms of taking that work to phase 2, or in some cases, phase 3 of implementation, and then taking that work in such a way that we fill gaps that would need to be filled to advance and replicate and scale up actions at the global level. Today, we are going to be undertaking the solutions finding stage. And hopefully, at the end of today, we'll be able to frame an action plan that will outline the work that will take us to COP30 and then to 2030 as we map out that agenda. So we look forward to the discussions today, both here in the Dome as well as concurrent sessions which will be running all day in the Lula Room. And I point your attention to the agenda which outlines the themes that will be covered both here and in the Lula Room. His Excellency the President will be joining us for the closing session today at 4, and we hopefully will be able to share with you at that time the key aspects of the action plan, which is in draft right now and will be further informed by the discussions that will take place during today's panels, both here and in the Lula Room. So I hope I've been able to encapsulate the main messages, the themes covered, and what will take place today. Some of the main objectives of the panels today will cover the goals of 30 by 2030. We will also look at biodiversity monitoring and how that framework needs to be shaped to inform policy and to be scaled up for decision making. And we will also be covering aspects with regards to success stories at the community level and how those could be scaled up. Kian, I hope I've been able to summarize the proceedings in a manner that gives a focus for today's discussions, which would be to find solutions to the crisis that confront us. I hand over to you. Thank you.
Ms. Bolanod, thank you for providing such a comprehensive overview of yesterday's proceedings and setting the tone for what we can expect today. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have the distinct honor to introduce someone who has lent not only his voice, but his energy and his life's work to creating meaningful change in this world. A steadfast champion of biodiversity and a bridge builder among global stakeholders, he continues to inspire with his unwavering commitment to sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our first moderator, President Iván Duque, who will share brief remarks, introduce our COP30 President, and also lead us in today's discussion. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's always fascinating to wake up in the morning here in Georgetown and feel not only this great connection with nature, but acknowledging the quality of this summit, where so many voices and experts that are committed to the protection of the planet are gathered. This morning, we start the day with a very important conversation about international will and how to strengthen the cooperation related not only to the protection of ecosystems and biodiversity, but more importantly, to accelerate the overall concept of climate action. I have the honor this morning of welcoming the president of COP30, Ambassador Corrêa de Lago, who is not only a recognized diplomat, author, and someone who has been able to cover his life in multiple fronts, including also his knowledge in architecture and his knowledge of, but I would say more importantly, someone who comes from civil society. I also want to welcome Minister Habet from Belize, who is not only representing the policies that he has embraced, but the leadership of President Briceño. As many of you know, Belize has the second largest coral reef system in the world after Australia and the largest in this hemisphere. And we are proud to see that Belize has put the blue economy, the green economy, and the orange economy as the drivers of social transformation. And I also have the pleasure of presenting in this panel Dr. Sanjan, who is the CEO of Conservation International, one of the most recognized conservationists, a scientist by training, but someone who has been an advocate and a preacher that has been able to mobilize private sector resources and to increase the participation of philanthropy when it comes to global action. So this is why I'm so delighted to be the anchor of this panel. I want to briefly put some context to the conversation that we're going to have. And let me be clear on something. The data that we have today estimates that, for example, Africa has to invest more than $2.8 trillion in order to meet the whole African system NDCs by 2030. Latin America and the Caribbean have to face a challenge of a bigger magnitude, slightly bigger, but even a big request in order to fulfill all that is needed to trigger action. Now, the question is, where are those resources going to come from? And we know that certainly from budgetary allocations, those resources are not going to be there just because there are very difficult fiscal constraints in the world. I mentioned yesterday that according to the IMF, the debt to GDP average in the world is more than 95%, which means that the fiscal space is going to be very tight. So the mobilization of resources to achieve climate action definitely is not going to find in budgetary allocations the answer. Now, are the resources going to come from multilateral institutions? Since multilateral institutions use lending as their main instrument, that limited fiscal space is only going to mobilize some resources and technical cooperation resources, but not the difference that we need. The third source, which is also related to bilateral donors, is not going to be the solution. Yes, there will be maybe some bilateral donors from countries that we allocated in a specific country or region resource, and that's fine. We definitely need to combine those instruments. So the question is, if philanthropy, if bilateral allocation, and if budgetary resources are not going to be the ones who will mobilize the largest amount of capital needed to meet the NDCs, where is the money going to come from? And this is something that has to do with international will, but also in how do we further cooperation. And I think that's where the concept of market-driven nature-based solutions or climate-based solutions come into the equation. We all know that we have seen many advancements on carbon credit markets, even despite the critics that the markets have faced in the last few years. But we need to have fair pricing. We need to improve the accounting. We need to provide all the transparency. And we need to allow those regions in the world that don't really have a voluntary carbon market to be able to compensate through projects in the global south so that resources are very well allocated. That is also a challenge that we face. But beyond that, we even know that as important as carbon neutrality is nature positive as a concept. And most of the resources that have been allocated in climate action have been allocated in the carbon market spectrum. How are we going to devote more resources for nature positive solutions? How are we going to work more closely with indigenous communities? How are we going to create units of measurement that are credible enough so that private sector resources will be devoted to restoration and conservation? And I think this is one of the most interesting elements of this morning's debate, because we are here in a country that is a part of the Amazon biome. And the Amazon biome, it's at a turning point. If the deforestation rate of the Amazon doesn't stop completely in the next 3 to 4 years, the Amazon is no longer going to be a contention wall and will become a net emitter. And if that happens, considering the size of the territory that we have lost in the last 4 decades, we're going to see further deterioration that will impact not only human security, human health, but food security and all necessary ecosystem convergence that the Amazon triggers, including the high altitude ecosystems. So what we expect this morning is to debate on how can we put more resources for conservation and restoration. How can COP30 be a place where practical, smart finance solutions are strengthened and accelerated? How we can provide all the integrity that the private sector is demanding, and how can we connect the global south with the allocation of resources in the global north? What I don't want to see in COP30, based on my experience, is I don't want to see neither a whining situation from the global south, nor a patronizing situation from the global north. And that involves that the global north needs to do something fast to provide the right pricing for carbon in the global south. And it also has to do with the need that voluntary carbon credit markets in the global north need to allow the companies of the global north to provide resources to the global south via compensation in projects. Some people have criticized the compensation, saying that is greenwashing. And I love to have that debate, because I think even sectors difficult to abate and corporations in the global north, they need to reduce their emissions by a moral standard, by a de facto objective. But that doesn't mean they should close the possibility to also compensate in the rest of the world. It's the only way that we can, in the short term, mobilize the resources that are needed in the Global South. Without those market solutions, we're just going to be having great promises, maybe great pledges, but not enough results. So I'm not going to speak longer than that. I just want to frame what we're going to see this morning. And we expect that this Global Biodiversity Alliance will provide a specific request to be brought to COP30, which involved, yes, the smart financing, which involved the relationship between the Global North and the Global South, and which involved the overall world attention to the Amazonic biome that is the richest biodiversity hub in the planet and a place that sinks more than 10% of all the greenhouse gases emissions globally. So, saying all this, I have the delight of presenting the president of COP30, Ambassador Corrêa de Lago. Ambassador, we're very honored with your presence. This alliance is here to support you and this agenda, and we expect that you allow in the programming of COP30 not only to have this significant roundtables with the private sector to mobilize resources for the purposes that I just mentioned, but also that the Global Biodiversity Alliance is a good fit in which we create the sound connection between COP30 on climate, COP16 on land degradation, COP16 on biodiversity, and that what we have discussed in the last 2 days will be substantial part of the overall action plan. So the floor is yours, and thank you for being here, Ambassador.
Good morning to all. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I thank very much President Ali for this invitation for President Lula, and President Lula insisted with me that I had to come, and it was easy to say yes, so I am here and I'm very glad to be among you. It's also a pleasure to be introduced by President Duque, and very strong and very important words that he just delivered. I'm going to put a little in context COP30, but very much in context of what you were saying, President. COP30, as we all know, is the 30th COP of a convention that was signed in Rio in 1992. Yes, I'm an old man, I was there, and I saw everything happen, and in fact, we had 3 conventions of Rio, as we say. 2 that were really signed there, which is the Biodiversity Convention and the Climate Convention, and then the decision to have the desertification one with the degraded land that was signed a little after, but that's why they're called the 3 Rio Conventions. These 3 conventions at the time were designed very separately because for most of the young people, you cannot imagine how little we knew at the time and how important it was to take the decision to sign this agreement at the moment that there was still a considerable uncertainty. The uncertainty from a scientific point of view has essentially disappeared because now there is a consensus not only on climate, biodiversity and desertification, but there is also, unfortunately, a consciousness that the bad things are happening more quickly than we expected. So we have to do everything possible as quickly as possible. And this initiative that we see here today is extremely important because we need to bring together all the actors. And the actors are not only the central governments. And so this is why it's very important to see so many dimensions of civil society together with governments in this initiative. we're thinking of COP30 very much in that line. COP30 has a mandated negotiation, which is the one that follows the convention and the Paris Accord. The Paris Accord will be 10 years under the convention, will be 10 years in Belém. So we have the formal negotiations that are the essence of the COP. But we also have a leaders summit, which is also something that we believe has to be used in a special way. And then there is the action agenda. The action agenda was started with Paris like 10 years ago and grew stronger starting in Glasgow at COP26. But the action agenda sometimes is misunderstood. It is, some people look and say it's like a fair or something like that. It's not at all. It has grown because when we think that we have to implement the agreements, those who implement the agreements are not necessarily the central governments. You need the private sector, you need civil society, you need universities, you need subnational governments. All these actors do not participate in the negotiation. So the action agenda opened the door to these actors. And little by little, they became an essential element of the COPs. So Brazil decided that the action agenda had to have a very structured base to be more effective at COP30, so that we could call really the COP30 an implementation COP. And what did we do? We decided that there was enough negotiation. Most of the things that we committed in Paris have been negotiated. And 2 years ago in Dubai, we had the GST, the global stocktake. The global stocktake includes extremely important decisions that were taken, as you all know, by consensus, because this is one of the great difficulties of the COPs, is that everything has to be agreed by consensus. So we had the GST as a base, and last year in Baku, we had a COP that had to deal with the financial dimension. And we also took a formal decision by consensus regarding the increase of resources for developing countries to be able to face climate change. There were many frustrated actors by the Baku decision. And there was an expectation that it would be frustrating because we only agreed to 300 billion, and the numbers that President Duque presented show how little this is when we look at the task ahead. But there was also a decision in Baku that the president of COP29 and the president of COP30 would together present a report, which is a roadmap to reach 1.3 trillion a year by 2035. So we had the basis, that's what we thought, that we had already agreed with most things, including Article 6 on carbon credits. And so we had to facilitate the actors to implement what has been decided by government. So we structured the action agenda into 6 different axes. And one of these axes is an axis that is absolutely central for today's discussion, which is forests and oceans. And we want to bring solutions to these challenges. And I think that that's exactly what you're looking for at this meeting here. So we're going to have 30 main subjects. It's all explained in a letter that I published last month, and that is available. I'm not going to bore you with all the listing, but the action agenda is going to be extremely dynamic and will be very much focused for the wider participation of the local governments, of private sector, academia, etc. So civil society in general is appreciating this more structured approach that will also allow everybody to know what is happening, and we are accumulating information on what the other action agendas have achieved, and we have to build upon what was achieved by the previous action agendas. So this structured approach will have a very strong impact regarding the discussions of today. And why that? Because we believe, if we believe in science, and I think that everybody here believes in science, we know that we have little time and that we have to organize the information and the science, because we also have enough science and enough experience and enough good examples of things that are working in the sense of working with forest countries. In fact, a lot changed thanks to the OTCA, the organization of the Treaty of the Amazonian countries that we have here. The head of this organization, that is the only international organization that is in Brazil, by the way. We are going to, we started 2.5 years ago, President Lula decided that the COP would be in the Brazilian Amazon. And he thought that the first countries we have to talk to are the neighbors. So we called the neighbors and we had that summit in Belém, the city that President Lula had already chosen to be the city for COP30. And at this meeting of the organization of the Treaty of Amazonian countries, we had a very the beginning of a declaration called United by Our Forests that our countries joined, and that also included at the time the two Congos and Indonesia. So we brought together and St. Vincent and the Grenadines that was heading CELAC at the moment. So we expanded that group to debate among governments first the idea that there are three very important aspects that have to be taken into consideration for having resources for forests. One is the dimension of conservation. The other is avoiding deforestation, and the other is restoration of forests. So for restoration of forests, I completely agree that we need to have the most dynamic and efficient carbon market possible, because the credits from forest restoration are by definition much better credits than any other credits, because they are the only ones that capture CO2 that has already been emitted. So we have enough knowledge, and we know that we also had, as President Duque mentioned, we had counter-offensive against these credits, and their prices went down, and the credibility was very much questioned. I think that it is our obligation as forest countries to prove that we can have extremely serious and verifiable credits from forest restoration. And so I believe that there is a really impressive opportunity at COP30 for us to show how we can strengthen the idea of a carbon market of forest restoration. For avoiding deforestation, we also have a financial mechanism that was created under the convention, climate change convention, which is called REDD+. And REDD+ is a way of obtaining financial resources by the result of the decrease of deforestation. This has worked in a quite effective way in Brazil and other countries, and we believe that REDD+ can be strengthened. So this is a different mechanism from the carbon markets for restoration. And then we had conservation. And conservation is complex because conservation is at the same time easy to understand, but at the same time, it's the activity that faces more clearly the difficulty of measuring the value of the forest. And I think that we made significant progress in that sense too. And technology is helping us because technology can check if conservation can be confirmed daily, by the way, with new satellites. So that's why Brazil has proposed a specific mechanism for the conservation of forests, which is called the Tropical Forest Forever Facility, the TFFF, that was announced in Dubai and has been perfected in these 2 years and should be launched at COP30. TFFF is a very original and very important contribution to the financial, to obtain financial resources for conservation. And I believe that this is going to be an extremely positive evolution because you're going to have the TFFF for conservation, you will have to strengthen REDD+ for avoid deforestation, and we have to have a very strong carbon market for restoration of forests. So we have three distinct activities in forests that have to receive the financial resources to go ahead. And I think President Duque was very, touched an issue that sometimes is very uncomfortable, but I think is extremely important to stress, which is the knowledge we have today of tipping points. There are things that we have to do, for instance, in the Amazon region, that we have very few years to do to avoid a general salinization of the Amazon forest that would have absolutely awful consequences, including for the regime of rains, for instance, in Brazil, that is the base of our agriculture. So the salinization of the Amazon is one of the circa 20 tipping points that have been identified, and probably is the one that we are closer to. So stopping deforestation and stimulating restoration of forests is the best instrument we can use. And we have at the GST, and that's why I mentioned the global stocktake that was signed in Dubai, we have in the GST very clearly an international consensus on stopping deforestation by 2030 and improving restoration of forests. So we are, I believe, going in the very same direction, and we have to engage actors that somehow have been reluctant. And we need one thing among others that ends up being a stumbling block every time that we try to advance on carbon markets, etc., which is a carbon accounting. The issue of carbon accounting is absolutely central, not only for that, but for instance, in the case of Brazil and many other countries, the measurement, for instance, of biofuels and other solutions that are nature-based. So we need to advance in carbon accounting, and I'm very glad that there is a strong basis, strong scientific basis to work on that, among other financial solutions for that report that I have to make about the $1.3 trillion per year by 2035 that I have to present with the president of COP29 from Azerbaijan. And for this, we have many people supporting us but we have mostly a group of economists that is working in many, in a variety of financial instruments that can be presented at COP30 in a much more clear way. And it is an exceptional group of economists that are getting together to bring innovative solutions for developing countries to receive resources. Because, as President Duque also said, this is a very difficult moment for international financing for the developing countries, because the risk that is perceived in our countries is much higher than the reality. We don't have fiscal space, and if we think we can depend on official resources from developed countries, unfortunately it's going to be infinitely lower than what is necessary. So we definitely need new ideas. And I believe that in all of them, we find the issue of carbon accounting as something that is an obstacle and that we have to overcome together. So I'm here to tell you how glad we are to be in the Amazon region among brothers and to be able to work together to value something that we have that most people agree it's worth billions, but that nobody can measure, and that makes our life quite difficult, because we are conscious we have to conserve, we are conscious that we can restore, and we are conscious we can reduce deforestation, but all these activities, unfortunately, are facing enormous obstacles, including organized crime, which has become something of an enormous difficulty in the region. And by the way, one of the results of the Belém meeting 2.5 years ago was to create a central entity that brought together the specialized police of our countries to share information. And this office has already opened in Manaus, and it's already advancing. So I'm very glad that this cooperation has already been accepted as an international reference. And I think that in many other issues, we can show how the Amazon region can lead the world in working with forests and having the other important forest countries, tropical countries, together with us. We estimate that around 70 countries have tropical forests, and that are coming together in this declaration that I mentioned of Belém, the United by Our Forests. But more than anything, we have to work together to agree that there are solutions, and we need to have a common way of seeing how to deal with forests, or we're going to be strongly manipulated, and we definitely know that we can avoid that. So together is the only way we believe we can go ahead. The main objective President Lula has from COP30 is the strengthening of multilateralism and cooperation, and it all starts in the region. So once again, thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you, Excellency, for such a thought-provoking presentation. At this time, I'd like to invite the moderator, President Duque, as well as his panelists, to take the stage so that we can begin the first session for this morning.
We're waiting for the mic so that we feel from the Acropolis here.
Do bear with us for one moment, please. We are getting the mics for the presenters.
Hello. All right. I think we have all heard this morning from Ambassador Corrêa de Lago a great vision for COP30. And I'm delighted to have in this panel, as I said, a group of experts and people who have been actively participating in conservation and climate action. But I want to start with Martin von Hildenbrand, who is the Secretary General of the Amazon Cooperation Treaty, a treaty that was installed in 1978 and that is a unique instrument of international cooperation and coordination. It is an international organization that is based in Brasilia and that has historically counted with the support of Brazil through Itamaraty and other institutions. Martin von Hildenbrand, that as I mentioned, is the first Colombian to achieve the Secretary General role of vodka, as we call it in Spanish. And he comes from civil society. But I have to say something before I give the word to him. We've known each other for quite some time. And Martin von Hildenbrand was a hero in the 1980s, and he continues to be one of those. During President Márquez's administration in Colombia, he pushed at the time to have the largest expansion of the protected areas in Colombia by including more than 600,000 hectares of that time. And he has been working very actively with indigenous communities. So it's not that easy to be a Colombian and have such a European name, but I have to say that Martin is also considered by many of the indigenous communities part of their family, and it's because of hard work. So I wanted to make that introduction, Martin, to allow you to share the vision that you're bringing to OTCA, and I know you're bringing some important proposals looking forward to COP30, so the word is yours.
Thank you so much, President Iván Duque, and good afternoon to all of you. Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you so much. I'll make a small correction, just a detail. It wasn't 600,000. It was 20 million. A small difference, hectares.
In total?
No, in total it's 26 million now.
No, now. Yes.
Now, yeah, but the 20 million was it doesn't really matter, but it was a large piece. And thanks to the government, and thanks to all my friends, and thanks to you, a lot has been done also in protected areas. So we've all worked together. Thank you. I want to bring, I don't know if we can put up a map in a moment. I'd ask for a map. Look down on us, the global north. And there's no reason why we should allow them to. And I think that, so I'd like to start first talking about what we have, and then move on to where we can go with this. I don't know if we can produce that map. It was sort of important. I don't know who's in charge of that. Because I would like to start by highlighting that we have 40% of the Amazon region already under protection. And that is extremely important. And when I'm talking about 47%, half of that territory are protected areas, partly thanks to President Duque, and part of that is our indigenous territories. I'd like to highlight that because that means that already indigenous people are playing a fundamental role. It's not just a question of, here we are at the map, I don't know if you can see it, but the green is our protected areas and the yellow are indigenous territories. As you can see with this map, we have a lot. We're not starting from scratch. It's not that we don't have something to show, we have a lot. And what we have to do with this is consolidate them and communicate. Yesterday I mentioned, when we spoke about 30-30, and here we have this, and we're still losing. It's not just having protection, it's connecting the protection. It's fundamentally not just as Ambassador Corrêa de Lago said, which is fundamental, we have to reduce, and we have to reduce deforestation. There's no question about that. We have to restore. There's no question about that. But what we have to keep in mind is that this is a system. And we have to restore in such a way that we can keep the functioning of the Amazon. And we must keep the functioning of the Amazon because that is what produces the water cycles, that is what produces the resilience, that is what produces the whole functioning, I'm repeating myself, the full functioning of the system. And that water from the Amazon, we have 70% of the GDP of the whole of South America depends on the water of the Amazon. We have the resilience of the temperatures, the stability of the temperature depends on the Amazon. If we lose the Amazon, we go up 2 degrees. And that's fatal for the whole planet. It's not just an Amazonian country. It's not just a regional problem. It's a global problem. And I'll come to that in a moment. But I just want to highlight, we have all this already. The second point I want to highlight, we have already, and was mentioned by Ambassador Corrêa de Lago, and thank you for that, it was mentioned the importance of the Amazon Treaty. We have a treaty among the 8 countries, which is a very important thing. We have a treaty. We're working together to protect the rainforest and the well-being of its people. And in this treaty we have resolutions that have been agreed also among all the governments, which is not something minor. We have resolutions that we talk about alternative economy, sustainable development, avoiding the tipping point, participation of indigenous people, participation of the dialogue with the civil society. We have networks to manage the water, the fire, I've lost it now, the forest, the fire, etc. We have a commission for security. This has not been mentioned here. One of our main problems in the Amazon is security. How can we work if we're going to be shot? How can we work if our leaders are killed? And we set up 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks in Colombia, which is now in charge of the first year of this, a special commission for security, for social security and environmental security. How can we stop deforestation if it's illegal? How can we stop the mining if it's illegal? We have to work on security. It's fundamental for all of us. And so these are already, the treaty is working on this. It's established. It's not only an instrument that is pointing at this. We have set this up. It is working. Everything what I'm talking about are facts. This exists. The other fact that we have, which is very important, talking to what you said, the participation of the social society. They have got together 13 networks of social society, and I'll talk about from the scientific to the indigenous people, to the NGOs, to the religious governments, religious movements, which are extremely important. Sometimes we forget religious movements are important. And not that I'm particularly religious, but they're in the field. They're talking with the people. They're talking with the criminals. They can talk with all. These people are fundamental. We also need them, and they are powerful. And politically they are powerful because they can manage votes. I mean, they are important people. And sometimes we forget to work with them because perhaps we don't believe in what they're doing or whatever it is. But we're not talking about ideology here. We're talking about needs. Now we're coming up against the tipping point. We're coming against the collapse if we don't pay attention. We just have to hold hands, all of us, beyond ideologies, beyond our beliefs. We just have to work together. And this is something that we are doing. So I'm saying that we have 13 networks. They've got together, they have discussed, they've come to agreements. They have the same points that we have that we're talking about in COP30. The same points. What does that mean? What is our hope? And here I do mention it's a hope. It's not a fact. My hope is that we'll be able to come to COP30 with the civil society, with governments, all working together. We'll be able to speak the same language, rowing in the same direction. So we do have a lot already. Another very important fact that we have the privilege that on the 22nd of August in Bogota, we will have a COP30, a pre-COP. So it's called a pre-COP with the 8 presidents. Terribly important. And they will be getting together to see how can we go, or how can they go, or how can we all go together to COP30. And with accompanying the 8 presidents that will be there are all the representatives of the civil society. All these different people I'm talking about, their leaders will be there also. We're talking together. We're moving in the same direction. And this will be 3 months before COP30. We will then have time to strengthen our decisions that we will make with the presidents to get to COP30. Now, we have this, what I'm saying, we have this already. Now, what I'd like to highlight, and particularly here with Ambassador Corrêa and Lago, is that in this meeting, what is fundamental, and we've been discussing about this, we've spoken with this with all the governments and with Itamaraty, etc. We're talking about what would be fundamental, and it's up to the president to decide. This is just a proposal, but discussed already, that we come to a serious commitment, a serious binding commitment, that each country will collaborate to maintain the functioning of the rainforest. The function of the rainforest to avoid the tipping point. They have even proposed that we have an NDC, an extra NDC, which is a national commitment, but a common NDC, where we will include it, not with extra goals, not with extra dates, just a quality one NDC that says each country will commit to collaborate with the other countries to maintain the functioning of the rainforest to avoid the tipping point. If we go to COP30 with this, with civil society, with the indigenous people, which we already have in the treaty, we already have a special commission for the participation of indigenous people. The indigenous people are participating also in the scientific panel. The knowledge of indigenous people, we're giving a great importance because we must realize that the indigenous people are not primitive people. They are people as ancient as we are. They've been around the world as long as we have. They have the same IQ, but they have looked at the life not from our scientific point of view, but from their intimate relationship with the environment, but have a lot to offer. So all this knowledge coming together. So we have that already. So if we can come to COP30 with civil society together, with the governments together, with a serious commitment, binding commitment that we are going to protect the rainforest, that we already have this mechanism, we already have this, the Amazon Treaty, we already have the binding, we have an observatory in the treaty, an excellent observatory where we can make a clear follow-up of climate change and of the tipping point. And we can say, gentlemen to the northern, we are doing our best, but our main problem is not deforestation. Our main problem is climate change. Our main problem is temperature. What is happening, and we can prove this scientifically, we are losing the rainforest because it's burning. It's burning because the temperature is going up. And it's going up because of the global north. We only emit 2%. We cannot sit down and discuss 2% with the north. We're nobody. But if we talk that we're protecting one of the main biomas of the world, if we put that on the table, and we're doing it together, and we say, now, gentlemen, what are you doing? Because your emissions, and because you're not funding what you said you're going to fund, we are in serious problem. And this is a global problem. It's not just our problem. So let's get together and let's talk about this, but we'll start from a position of strength. That's what I wanted to mention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martin. I think you've tackled very important elements, including something that is quite remarkable in the Amazon region on the amount of land that is already declared protected, but also the fact that we're in a country that still has 95% of its territory in tropical forest and that has one of the lowest deforestation rates, demonstrates that when there is political commitment, indigenous participation, things can be achieved. Minister Orlando Javier, it's great to have you in this panel. You come from Belize. I had the privilege of talking with President Briceño some weeks ago, and when he mentioned that he was not going to be able to be here, he said, but he will send his best envoy, and you are Minister of Sustainable Development and Climate Change. Belize has one of the most important coral reef corridors in the world and has been able to integrate blue economy, green economy, and orange economy into a national development agenda. What would be your proposal from a country like Belize perspective and thinking more in a LATAM spectrum, the concrete suggestions that you would love to see in COP30 being achieved in terms of financing, in terms of carbon credits development, and something in which you have been also very active, which is debt swaps related to the conservation and protection of the coral reef system. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, President Duque. Good morning, everyone. You mentioned certainly the fact that we have the largest coral reef in the Western Hemisphere. We like to say it is although it's the second largest barrier reef globally, it is the largest living barrier reef because it is still very alive. But our barrier reef is also a World Heritage Site, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So while it is within Belizean territorial or Belizean maritime waters, I like to say it belongs to the region, it belongs to humanity, it belongs to the world, so we all need to take care of it. We, for example, were, I think in the region, were the first to sign on to the BBNJ. But how can a small country like Belize really see and monitor what is going on beyond our territorial waters? So it can't be something that we will do alone. It has to be something done regionally, globally. We cannot, we don't have the resources to see what is going on beyond, if it's deep sea mining or whatever it is. But we know that whatever happens out there will affect our barrier reef. And closer beyond the barrier reef is our coast, where we have our tourism, where we have our fisher folks, where tourism occupies currently 50% of our GDP. So when we had to do the debt swap, because we entered a government where we found ourselves at 134% of debt over GDP, so we had to act quickly. So Prime Minister Briceño and our government had to do that, work through with TNC, the collaboration with TNC, Swiss Bank, and I think we had assistance from various banks, World Bank and IDB. But it put us back on our feet. So that was one way of getting some financing to move out from there, but it also committed us to reaching our 30% goal for marine conservation, which we hope to achieve by 2026. We are a little bit ahead of time. I believe that it is absolutely important that when we go to COP30, addressing climate change, and we have heard here that we need to have integrity, we need to have transparency. When we look at our carbon markets, we need to see how these are verifiable, and all these are good. But also the global community, those who will be purchasing, the richer countries who are doing the purchase, also have to have that integrity, also have to have that transparency. And so they have to understand the value of our carbon credits, of our biodiversity credits. We say that biodiversity is worth trillions, but when we try to market it, we are getting little money for it. So we cannot do the work that we need to do in conservation if we are not being paid well for it either. So I believe that at COP30 it will be imperative that we address these issues. President said that certainly there will be these fora where we can address these issues, and that is what we are looking for. Belize is a small country. We have 400,000 people. So we have 8,800 square miles. That's a very low population density of between 44 to 50 persons per square mile. So our emissions are small. Our consumption, when you look at the global picture, is small. So our contribution to climate change is very little. So our mitigation actions are lesser, but we need to do a lot more work on adaptation, because out of 167 countries, the World Bank considered us number 6 in terms of vulnerability as a SIDS country. So we are right smack in the middle of being affected by climate change every time. And my colleague here mentioned the fact that climate change is the one that is really doing the effects. 2 years ago, we had a hurricane, and the hurricane is a category 3, came inland, and we have all of our broadleaf forest inland in the mountainsides. And right away, I knew when we did a flyover with a helicopter, we found out that the broadleaf forest was affected. And lo and behold, 1 year later, all those tree limbs and trees that fell became fuel for forest fires. And we had some massive forest fires last year. So these are things, and we don't have the capacity with the helicopters like in the US or Canada or Australia to be flying over and outing the fires. But it is destroying our biodiversity. We have projects that we have put in place. We have, for example, we have a collaboration with Jeff for a jaguar project, and we have the local communities that are involved. We have the local NGOs, civil society, and we are building the corridors, a northern, northeastern corridor, a western corridor, and a western to southern corridor. And we believe it is working because, as I mentioned, a small country with 400,000 people, we don't have superhighways, but yet we're seeing jaguar kill, which means to say the corridor is working because the jaguars are moving around. But we have to have the funding now to see how we can put in place the infrastructure for the wildlife crossing so that they are not killed after we are protecting them.
Thank you so much, Minister. I think those were very clear remarks. And that takes me to you, Dr. Sanjan. You are the CEO of Conservation International. You're a scientist, and you have proven to achieve multiple things, but I want to highlight 3. One, you have been a pioneer, working with many countries like the ones that are represented here in order to trigger carbon credit markets, in order to trigger blue credit markets, as you did in Colombia in the Cispatá Bay, a very interesting project that allowed us to preserve one of the most important maybe treasures that we have in our nature, and to get companies like Apple to buy those credits. You have been supporting many of the countries in achieving 30 by 30 or 30 before 30, as you also did in the case of Colombia. You have done it in other countries with WWF, with TNC, with the Bezos Cert Fund. But you're also a great fundraiser of private capital for nature purposes. So I mention all this because one of the most interesting reports that has come out recently on the Amazon came in a collaboration from Conservation International. I see here Rachel Biederman, who was very active there, and WRI. And you both worked together and said this is a development blueprint for the Amazon. For those who are here, if the Amazon biome were a country, it will be the biggest country in Latin America and the Caribbean. And it will be the 3rd largest populated country in Latin America after Brazil and Mexico. More than 50 million people live there.
We have cities that can be called biodiverse cities. And we have citizens that can be called biodiverse citizens because they have to live with this biome. So based on that report, based on that experience, what specific suggestions do you think this Global Biodiversity Alliance can bring to COP30 and can be a good input for Governor Corrêa, Ambassador Corrêa? Maybe you'll be a governor later, but
that's another headache.
Ambassador Corrêa.
That's a whole different headache for the ambassador. Thank you, President Duque, for your kind introduction and for your steadfast leadership. And thanks to all the panelists. I mean, really a remarkable group of individuals with real wisdom and real different perspectives, real lived perspective. And I rarely say the word humbled, but I do feel a bit humbled, you know, sitting amongst people who've spent enormous amounts of time in their lives really struggling with this challenge that we face as a species, we face as humanity. So let me answer this both as a conservation leader, I guess, and as a scientist. I'm not going to go over the data, right? I think at this point everyone here understands it. Here's what I want to say as a participant in this conference and as a participant at COP30. I think we meaning all of us here, our tribe, I think we really have to decide whether we want to win or we want to be right. I think we have spent a lot of time trying to be right. And I think we need to start thinking about how we win. And I think this is a real challenge for scientists who are data-driven and for idealists who conservationists are. Like, people start conservation organizations from passion, from commitment. And to some extent, even politicians, right? The ideology drives it. But I think we really need to be much more pragmatic. And pragmatic to me is not a bad word. Pragmatic is finding the way to keep moving forward, to keeping our eye on the target. And I think we've lost sight of that. It's why many COPs have been maybe less, I don't want to say disappointment, but less progress than we anticipate. And we cannot keep going through the same motions again. I think that the leadership that Ambassador Corrêa de Lago and Anatoni, you know, the climate champion for Brazil, I think they are taking a deeply pragmatic view of COP30 because it is a seminal moment. And the world is in a very, very unique place compared to, say, COP26 when we were in Glasgow and we'd just sort of come out of the pandemic and there was a different mood, right? And I think that's going to serve as well. So let me say two things to sort of add to what I have to say here. The first is a small point I want to make as a scientist. And I'm not taking issue with what the ambassador said, but I'm making a friendly amendment to it. I don't think it's really about science. And I don't think it's about precision. So there's many, many, many things in the world that we can measure with much greater precision than we can measure carbon or biodiversity. And we take remarkable action on that. Take GDP, for example. Like, what does GDP really have to do with the state of individuals? If you go to the United States today, most people will say they're not better off, they're worse off. Yet the GDP is remarkably strong. So you have here a measure that we've used for a very long time that doesn't actually reflect. Go to your doctor. Go to your doctor and ask him, am I healthy? And then look at the test that they'll do on you, and they will end up exactly where they started. It's a very simple question with an enormous amount of precision that we can measure different things about our body, and yet we cannot answer this simple question. So I think that science has been used a little bit as a foil to prevent us from really thinking about the value of nature and applying it in real-world applications by both sides. By both sides. Basically, anyone who doesn't like it, right, will use it as a foil. Now, that does not mean, look, I'm a geneticist, I'm a scientist, and my heart is in science. Does not mean we don't need basic science and advanced research. We do. We can do carbon accounting better, we can do biodiversity accounting better, and we have to continue to make progress on that, 100%. But it's really not ultimately an issue about us not understanding the science. That's first. The second thing is really about how are we going to make all of this happen. And to me, that comes down to, really being creative about how we can stimulate a bioeconomy, a new type of economy. And it has to come on both sides. So the positive side, where you're doing something positive, is really being able to value nature, make money out of it, and then create the kind of wealth generation that other people want to participate in. So we have new things like my colleague here from Sylvania is here. We talked a little bit about it yesterday. They have announced a $500 million nature fund. This is an investment product that is going to invest in nature, and you can participate as an investor. And the idea is, if they make money, you make money, which will then drive more investments, nature-positive investments. Conservation International does a fantastic project in Brazil with BTG Pactual, one of sort of the biggest banks out there. And this is a restoration project in the Cerrado, so adjacent to the Amazon. And it covers about 1 million acres. And this project really is to restore it. Half of it, and the payback is half of it through carbon credits and half of it through timber, so FSC certified timber. So this is previously degraded land, right? So right now it's grasslands. Once it used to be forest, now it's grasslands. And what BTG Pactual is doing is it's taking those lands, putting half of it into native forest restoration, which will be left intact forever, and the other half into timber. And between the two, they can assure their investors a return-seeking, return-seeking capital, right? And they've raised about $1 billion now to do this. Now think about that. So Conservation International, the impact advisor for this. Imagine I was trying to raise $1 billion, or let's say half of it. Remember, half of it is native forest restoration that is left intact forever. So imagine I was trying to raise half, $500 million, in private philanthropy, in order to do restoration in the Cerrado. No way. There's no way I could do that. No one really could. So it really takes a different kind of instrument to be able to mobilize capital like that. And I think the most exciting thing we're seeing today in conservation is more and more ideas like that. The Blue Carbon Initiative that President Duque spoke about in Cispata Bay in Colombia, for example, the work we're doing in Tocantins and others like it. Now, there's a big role that governments can play. And unfortunately, most of the Western governments, the global North, has been very, very late to play that game. And that is to provide some certainty around this marketplace. And I think it is time for the global South, the BRICS, for example, to step into this moment. If they do, I actually think the UK, the French, maybe the Americans at some point will now also step in with some force. Because without that, we're not going to be able to generate the funding to do that, right? The second one is supply chains. Every company is dealing with their supply chains right now. And every company is dependent on nature for their supply chains. Being able to guarantee their supply chains through investment in nature is incredibly important. So that's the positive side. The negative side is tariffs. So it's basically a tariff on nature, right? So what's a tariff? A tariff is basically a tax that a government puts in order to correct, in our case, in the United States, because it's in the papers every day, a trade imbalance. We have a gigantic trade imbalance with nature. A gigantic trade imbalance with nature. The biggest trade imbalance history has ever seen is right now happening with nature. And so what we really have to do is think on the other side is what's the right tariff to basically stabilize that trade imbalance. So, and that speaks to the tropical forest facility that the ambassador spoke about. How can we put a payment system in place that can really pay for this trade imbalance we see with nature, which is important to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanjan. Amazing remarks. So since we have, and I'm going to take some minutes, but we have to keep it to finish the panel in the next 15 minutes. I'm going to ask each one of you to be very precise in very complex questions. But let me start with you, Ambassador, because you have one of the most difficult jobs coming in a few weeks from now, because yes, you have to deal with Article 6, you have to deal with Scope 3, you have to deal with very complex negotiations. But at the same time, you have to deal with a unique opportunity, and is to have
in the Amazon basin, in the global south, the COP that will define the route for the next 5 years, in which if we do not achieve what it's aimed to be achieved, we won't meet the global NDCs towards 2030. So with that said, I think there's a reality that I wanna pick your brains with, and it has to do with the local governments, with the local capabilities, and also with the alliances that need to be built with indigenous communities and with the private sector. Brazil has very important examples of things that are being done the right way, but still has to face the challenges that countries like us still need to face with illegal mining, illegal crops, illegal cattle, you name it. So what are your objectives in terms of trying to raise the attention on the global north, on the specific protection of the Amazon biome, and how can we mobilize more resources for those local governments and to create a better cooperation with the private sector and indigenous communities?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. You give me an hour, I will answer most of it. Most of it. No, I think that there is an opportunity in the COP in Belém to bring the international community to understand the complexity of life in a place like the Amazon, because I think that unfortunately there is an oversimplification of what it is, you just conserve, etc. And I'm very glad that you mentioned, and also Martin also mentioned, the indigenous people, the local communities, the Afro-American communities that we have in this region. And we also have the quilombolas, which is a very important kind of community in Brazil, which are the formerly enslaved people that created communities since the 19th century. So these people have demonstrated that you can live with the forest, and more than that, I think we have some amazing evolution on archaeology regarding the Amazon. And the knowledge of how much of the Amazon was in fact planted by indigenous communities for thousands of years. So the knowledge about the Amazon for a Brazilian is already a surprise for the rest of the country, but it is also for the rest of the world, and it's going to be an extraordinary opportunity to show that complexity and try to show that instead of looking at it as a problem, we have the possibility of transforming it in one of the most important solutions to fight climate change. Now, the COP30 looks at forests from a CO2 point of view. This is a completely different from the biodiversity, and that is why somehow we want very much to strengthen the synergies between biodiversity and COP and climate change. They have been separated, as I said in the beginning, because science was very necessary to be developed. But now that we have enough, I believe it's the time that we have to put it together. And so many people are saying it's going to be a COP of nature, in which you have nature and climate together. And I think this would be a fantastic objective because nature as a solution, in the best sense of solution. And I have to say that I completely agree that I usually say it's irrelevant to be right. No? And at this stage, with the time that we have left to do what we need to do, we have to do even imperfect things if they go in the right direction. And I believe that this also has to be a shock of reality of the lack of time. You were saying time is really an absolutely central element. And the responsibility that we have as countries that have part of the Amazon, and I know I'm in a country that is preserving, as you said, more than 95% of their Amazon. But the responsibility that we have to do what is necessary, knowing about the tipping points, it's really something that I feel people don't understand. Here, we are among people that think the same way, but it's very difficult to convince many sectors of our countries that this is the time to do the right thing. I believe that if we achieve at the COP this understanding on how climate and nature can help each other, I think that the COP can already be considered a successful COP. So I hope we'll have the support of all the communities that we need, not only the local communities, but philanthropy is extremely important. An organization like OTCA is absolutely central. And I agree with you that probably the most difficult institutional structure we already have in our countries. We have to make them better, and we have to use them better because we have the structure. So people think I'm almost insane to be moderately optimistic about the COP, but I can tell you that I am still optimistic about the COP.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. That's good to have the Brazilian optimism, which is something that we feel very proud of. Martin, something very concrete. Two elements that I think are essential for the plan that you outlined. One is funding. So OTCA works with the Amazon biome countries. You have a big development bank in Brazil like BNDES, that is the largest development bank in the region. And you have maybe Findeter in Colombia, you have some of the local development banks in Peru, but still the coordination among development banks is not enough. And they have not focused yet on the Amazon as they should be. Maybe, I would say with the exception of BNDES that works closely with the governors. So funding is a question that I wanted to ask, and how the multilateral financial institutions should work with OTCA is something that I wanted to ask. And maybe, as we call it in Colombia, a ñapa, which is a small little question inside the question, is aggregated value chains with indigenous communities. I was recently in Belém do Pará. I visited one of the Coca-Cola plants, and they're working with some of the indigenous communities in the supply of copoaçu and camu camu for producing very important products. But I also went to Natura, to one of their production lines, and they're also working with indigenous communities, so they create a sustainable aggregated value chain that protects some of the Amazon products and takes away incentives of destruction, and instead it's more protection and sustainable trade. On those two lines, do you have any specific requests that you would love to see addressed in COP30?
Thank you. Actually, you should answer this question, not me. You know a lot more about funding than I do. But anyway, thank you for your question. I'm going to start with the value and the importance of the indigenous people and the value chain of indigenous people. The first thing I would like to highlight, and I'm not talking exactly what you're talking about, but I would like to underline and highlight that the Amazon is already paying for itself. The Amazon is already producing water, climatic stability, resilience, and if we don't have that, we will be in serious trouble, very serious trouble. So really, I think that sometimes we underestimate and we think the Amazon has to produce, but the Amazon is producing. And I think that life is so important to give it its real value. As I was mentioning, it's not necessarily the value of the fruit, it's the value of the tree. is the value of the relationship of the trees. A topic that we haven't also highlighted, and Ambassador Corrêa de Lago, I think, was also mentioning very important, is the connectivity. It's how everything, the value of the relationship between all, how the whole system is relating. And there is where the value of the indigenous people come in. These people have a profound knowledge and understanding of the rainforest. They have a profound, and I would just like to highlight it for a minute, and I know it's not easy for us. We all tell be rational. That's the way we think. And science is our line, and technology is our line. The indigenous people are not along those lines. They have what they go through, because I've lived with them so long, I know exactly, I know what to do. There's a lot more that I don't know, but what's happening there. But they sit down every night, and they sit down and meditate profoundly. When an indigenous person is going to be a shaman, or is going to be a leader, or whatever it is, from the day he stops receiving from his mother's breast, he gets a specific diet, follows a specific diet, to be able to develop his capacity to understand or to lead in the community. He has a specific diet, and they listen profoundly to nature. A shaman will say, to become a shaman, I must look at the tree until I become the tree, until I click into that energy. It's not an encyclopedic knowledge, which they do have. They know a lot about trees and plants and all that. There we meet at the top, at the leaves of the tree. But at the roots, what are they? It's fundamentally, it's a meditation, it's understanding. It's connecting with what I dare call nearly a subconscious of nature, of the way we all are, because we are nature. When I say we are nature, I'm not saying, well, we are animals, and of course we are. We're the inheritors of nature. In the same way a tree has inherited millions of years, we have inherited millions of years. We have it in us. And they have developed that. They have looked deeply into what are we as nature. And this is where they connect. And for instance, I was a bit, not really confused, but they would tell me, animals come out in the forest. During the day, the animals are only a few monkeys and a few guacamayas. But at night, from 6 in the evening till midnight, all the animals come out. And that's when they meditate. And when they meditate there, I said, they would tell me, because we're talking with the animals. We're negotiating with the animals. We're asking how much can we hunt and how much do we have to restore. But it's not just talking with the animals. They are connecting with the flowing energy of the animals, which flows with them too. They're connecting at a level which we have in all of us. We all have that energy. It's just that we have turned our back on it and we have become rational. But all of us, when we see the stars in the sky at night, we go, because we are stars. And we see the sun going down, we go, sunset, because we are sunset also. We are nature. We're there. We're part of it. This is where the indigenous people can come in. That's their real value. That's where, if we have to go back to nature, because we have to, it's all very fine with our technology, it's all very fine with our science, but ultimately, our problem is not technological, it's ethical. Who are we? How are we related? It's very important science, but the problem will be solved in our consciousness. We have to understand who we are. We have to understand what nature is. And that's where the indigenous people can inspire us. I'm not saying we're going to become indigenous people. I'm not going to say, no, just inspire us. That's where I put the real value of indigenous people. Not when we, I dare not say we use their knowledge, but we make it practical and we find an extra plant for a medicine, or we find an extra plant for this or that product. That's our agenda. That's what I say we need. I'm not saying that we don't need funding for the indigenous people and for everything you're saying. And there the question comes in, I have great hope. And here I talk about hope. I have great hope in natural capital. I think that's the way it's moving, and I think that's really going to fund us. The question is, what do we do meanwhile? How do we move? People want their money now. They have to pay the schools now. They have to pay their meal now. And the other funding is coming. So we have to have this transition between one and the other. And that's where I think that all the multilateral, and they're already moving that way. It's all happening. They're all moving into that. It's how do we bridge? That, I think, is the challenge.
Thank you so much, Martin. Minister Orlando, debt swaps. I believe debt swaps have been a very important instrument. But I have a worry from a public finance perspective related to the ministries that are executing the climate agenda. You make the swap, which means, okay, you can write off part of the debt based on on an achievement, an environmental achievement that you have, but that does not necessarily turns into new funding or more KPI-oriented funding for the ministries that are leading the climate agenda. How do you believe we could connect those instruments with the allocation of more resources for the climate agenda? I've seen the cases of Ecuador, I've seen the cases in Belize, I've seen some of the cases in Barbados. Very important swaps in terms of a technical capacity, but they are not providing the additional resources that this agenda requires. How do you think we could bring that debate to COP30, and what would you specifically share from your experience that could be used to allocate more resources once you're successful on a debt swap?
Yes, it's a question that has been asked also in Belize in regards to our blue bond and the debt swap. So one of the questions is, for example, what happens to the fisher folk who used to fish in this region, and now we have excluded them from using this area for fishing because now we have it in conservation? How will they provide the livelihood for their families? And these are questions that we have to ask. But I believe that the establishment of trust funds from within that same funding that you obtained has to be established so that then you have more monies for longevity. The creation of public-private partnerships that will come in to collaborate with some of these monies that come in. And of course, the PPPs are very important. We also, for example, make certain that we get some of the funding from our tourism tax dollars, exit taxes. So we have a protected areas conservation trust, where a small portion of that exit tax goes to this trust fund, which also helps to finance the co-managers of our protected areas. Right now we are looking at, for example, our million tree that we want to plant, the million trees in the next 5 years. How will we fund it? Partly through that trust fund, but also we are looking at innovative financing. We have a country that is open and everybody says, oh, it's a haven for tourism. Well, the investors will come in and build hotels and resorts. They will come into the government and request for fiscal incentives for equipment, whether it's for utility vehicles, whatever it is. And so part of that incentive that they are receiving, a portion, a percentage, has to go towards the planting of these trees and for restoration and things like that. So those are some of the areas that we're looking at.
Thank you so much. And Sanjan, I'll finish this panel with you with one very precise question that has to do with connecting the dots of what has been said here. And it is the concept of helping some of the global south countries, and especially the countries in the Amazon biome, to issue biodiversity bonds, which means they can issue bonds that can be placed in the markets, but that will be connected with a specific biodiversity KPI achievements. And I know that there has been a lot of interest from the countries in doing that, but it can only be achieved if we have the scientific and technical support from organizations like CI, for example. And I want to pick your brains on that and connect this with a message that I think everybody here should know, and it's that there's an interest from President Ali and me that the technical secretariat of this Global Biodiversity Alliance will be supported by CI, having your team also here in Guyana with Curtis. And I believe it will be very important that in the next 2 years, before we have the next encounter here in Guyana, that will be in 2027, what do you think could be a roadmap in order to have more of the Amazon basin countries issuing biodiversity bonds with the support of organizations like CI?
Great question. And I just wanted to sort of make one comment on debt swaps, because we've done a few too. There's nothing that would prevent a country like Belize to say to the NGO partners who are helping, in order to make this debt swap work, you have to also raise 5% for the underlying ministries whose capacity needs to be built during that time. Because I think that's a very important point where, hundreds of millions of dollars potentially are going into a country for conservation, but the capacity in the ministries are still quite, sort of on starvation diet. And there's really, the easiest money you can raise is if you already have a commitment, then it's actually quite easy to go and ask donors to add to that. On your biodiversity bonds, biodiversity credit idea, I think there's enormous potential for this. I think a lot of countries, I think the European Union, they're heading in this direction of really understanding the value of nature and incorporating it within how they think about business. And I think that the big worry they have, I think there's a couple of worries, but one of the worries they have is, the certainty that money that is being spent actually delivers on the ground. And this idea of a rhino bond or a lion bond or a forest bond really kind of helps assure the investor that there is a return. And there's a KPI. And that the KPI, the guarantee of achieving that KPI is what promotes the payment. The same thing is true with biodiversity credits. I think we're on the cusp of sort of seeing that. We experimented with one in the little country of Niue, tiny country in the Pacific Ocean, that took basically all of its, waters, and basically, if you gave the country $148, this is the real number, $148, they will protect 1 square mile, maybe it's 1 square kilometer, but 1 square mile of coral reef and ocean for 20 years. And they will back it with the full faith of their government. And the money is actually managed offshore in New Zealand. So Niue issued this. We went and made a purchase as a way of getting this going. I think it's easy for a country to do it for its entire jurisdiction. That sort of helps them do that. I think countries like Guyana or Gabon, high forest countries, Bhutan, could really think about this kind of instrument. And I'm very excited for there to be some space at COP30 for these discussions, because in the future, we're going to have to rely on them even more as a way forward. And then one last plea to you, Ambassador, because I think next time we'll see each other would be in Brazil. Really do help us to make this Global Biodiversity Alliance part of this agenda. I think you're going to find that no one is against nature. No government is against nature. And it is maybe the only thing in human history that really everyone has agreed to. It's quite a remarkable thing. And so it is a common meeting point, nature. And if we focus on this nature and climate and really making that the common meeting point, whether you're an indigenous community, whether you're a business, whether you're a government, you will find a place where there is some, the ability to continue to have a dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So please give the panelists a big round of applause. I think we will move forward with the agenda, although Ambassador will have you this day in other activities, but I just want to say that we feel like if we had the Aladdin lamp here where we're asking for our wishes to come through, and I think what Sanjan just mentioned is very important, and I think it's the overall request that we all have. The fact that we have such a big consensus on conservation and nature, I think it'll be very important to have the Global Biodiversity Alliance to have that space also in COP30. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Sanjan. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Minister. And Ambassador, once again, thank you for being with us here in Georgetown, Guyana. Thank you all.
in leading us through what was certainly a thought-provoking conversation. There were many interesting talking points, such as the importance of debt for nature swaps, how that works, bringing major players into the conversation, such as BRICS, and addressing our trade imbalance with nature. All very pertinent points. At this point, I'd like to just inform you that you all have until 12 p.m. to confirm your tour bookings. You can do so at the help desk downstairs. And before we move ahead with the next panel discussion, as well as another concurrent session, which will get started in the Lula room, I will invite you all to stretch your legs for about 5 minutes. Don't go too far. We have another round of very thought-provoking discussions to come your way.